Hey everybody, this is AI with Dr. Craig Hansen, and I'm delighted to have Jason and Sanae with us here this morning for part two of part one that didn't record. So we're delighted to do this again. So I'd love for Jason and Sanae to introduce themselves, and I managed to reach out to them because they wrote a great section in a book around generative AI and higher education, which captured my attention. So how about Sanae, you take it away?
Hi, yeah, I'm Dr. Sanae Elmoudden. I'm with St. John's University. And I think, should we do the background on
Absolutely.
all right. So for my connection to AI, I should say, is through my son originally. My son is, he lives with schizoaffective. For those of us who do not know, this term is actually, it's basically symptoms from schizophrenia as well as depressive moods or bipolar depression. And so, and it's a very tough condition to live with. So I was looking into AI to try to find out what kind of AI is suitable. Are they like working on AI that actually can be helpful to people with mental illness or severe mental illness and mental health? And I found some of them that are like, there's one, I think it's called Wobot. It's a bot that actually helps with CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy. So it gives you some exercises and things like that, but they're still working on them. It's not completely something that the magical thing that can fix it all, you know. But that was my original thoughts about AI. And then after ChatGPT came out in 2023 in November, you know, just like everybody else, I got enamored with a lot of P-doom, basically, that Jason and I keep talking about it. Someday, my panic attack about AI and AGI, is vast. And some days it's like, this is actually just a tool and it's going to help us out and it can augment our abilities rather than take over everything that we have worked for or outsource our intelligence to it, etc. But then when I see some podcasts a little bit that have some PDOM of 99.99%, I'm like, well, I think it is going to get over us, like to, existential question and all of that. So I'm going to leave it there for a moment.
So my name
Jason.
is Dr. Jason Wrench. I am a professor in the Department of Communication at the State University of New York at New Paltz. My background, really, I've been studying how humans use technology to interact with one another going back to the mid-90s. It's always been one of those areas that I've been interested in, that I've published in. And so I've kind of always kept my ear to the tech world just to see what's going on. And a few years ago, I heard about this product that had just come out that had access to this new thing that could rewrite articles for you. And I was like, okay. So I tested it, played with it, and it said it could also write new things for you. Tested that, wasn't worried, because from one sentence to the next, it made no sense whatsoever. But I was like, sure, it spit out words, but that didn't mean anything. And then out of nowhere, in early November of 2022, you start hearing the rumblings and they're opening up this beta testing and they're looking for researchers that are going to get access to this. And I jumped right on board and thought, again, like a lot of people did, that it was just going to be researchers right off the bat. And then before we knew it, by the end of the month, they had opened up Chat GPT to everyone. But I remember looking at Chat GPT 3.5 when I first got access to it and going, this is something different. This is not what I saw just a year and a half ago. The sentences from one to the next made sense. The fact that you could ask it almost anything, it would come up with an answer. At that point, we really hadn't started to see all the problems that would appear with hallucinations with 3.5, but I was impressed with what its capabilities were. And it kind of made me go, how are we going to have to rethink what we're doing in higher education? Because whether we wanted to or not, the genie is now out of the bottle. How do we handle this bottle? Because we can either put our heads in the sand, which I have a lot of colleagues, that is their approach to anything involving AI, or we start coming up with new and interesting strategies. And I'm lucky enough right now to not only have worked with Sanae on our book on the role of generative AI in the communication classroom, but I'm also doing consulting work with Lumen Learning, working with faculty across the SUNY system and in other states to think about how we use generative AI as a pedagogical tool, that actually we can use generative AI to come up with new ideas, new activities for our students, new assignments, just thinking outside the box and realizing that this tool is a really fascinating tool that we can use right in our classrooms today.
I'd love for both of you to share some of those new ways of doing what we do in higher education, leveraging generative AI.
Well, for me, I'll start just one of the easiest things I like to be able to talk to when I'm talking to faculty is you can offload a lot of busy work on it. Simple things like, I have an assignment idea, I need a rubric. Hey, Chat GPT, or as I like to call it, my friend, write me a rubric on this. And you can say, I want 5 categories. Here are the categories I want. And it will generate that for you. And then you can work with it. And that's always one of the things I always stress with everyone is, to me, Chat GPT is a collaborator. It is a collaborative tool that you work with. And I think one of the biggest mistakes some novices make is when they first put in a prompt of any kind, they think that's the end of it. And that should be just the beginning of your interaction with ChatGPT when you're working with it to try to get the best outcome. And then from there, you can go back and forth and really create a really nice, robust rubric in a fraction of the time that it would take you. You can also do the same thing with assignments. If you're like, I need a new assignment idea, here's the general topic area, come up with 10 ideas, and you can mix and match the ones you like. You can say, nope, don't like any of those, give me some more. And so it's a great just friend to brainstorm with.
Great. How about you, Sanae?
So I will add to that. It is my friend, actually, like Jason. We really match on this, and I use it daily. So, but I do have this conflict, right? Whether it is actually something that will augment us as a human being, or will take over, just like any other. There are many professors who feel this way. I'm not alone. I tend to think that because it's here, we need to test it, we need to work with it. And I worked with it since the beginning as well, wrote about it from the beginning. But I also feel that it's a difference between when we see it as a tool, which is a collaborator right now. And I feel like, for instance, if we are writing into it or like editing, I use it a lot for editing, and in my case, because as English is not my first language, I use that, and it was helpful in that sense because it kind of, like level the field in some ways, that we all have access to actually make our English better in some ways. So that's a great thing. But I also, like, on the other hand, in the process of writing for our students, for instance, and I focus on this example, is that process that makes them feel better and get better with the writing. So if they upload and outsource all their writing to ChatGPT or any other, AI that is out there, generative AI, then it becomes an issue, right? So how do we have this balance between augmenting and not taking over? In other words, there are some, people within the computer science developing area that talk about having it as a tool, but then once it becomes an agent, then it's time for us to start worrying because it will take over. And and they talk about it, like, I think there's this Roman Yampolsky. He just had a conversation with Lex Friedman recently about his book, and he calls it AI Unexplainable, Unpredictable, and Uncontrollable. Uncontrollable, I get that word, where he talks about all the risks that actually might be out there once ChatGPT 5 comes along, or ChatGPT 6, once it becomes able to think on itself and make these decisions by itself. And that is something that worries me in the long run. And all these different podcasters that I see who are talking about safety, they talk about it within the next 2 or 3 years. In other words, we do not have time to catch up with regulations and policy and all of that. So how do you balance this within in the larger society or in the education field, which I make part of it? And I tend to think that, like Jason, we should be front and center with this conversation in the education and help other, academics to get involved in it, because it is there and it is there to stay. And we need to know, we need to be involved in, things that talk about accountability, things that talk about regulation, and all of that is very important, not only for our students, for academics, but for the larger society. So if you ask me, what is my P doom today? I would say 50-50.
Okay. I was chatting with Nadeem, the founder of teachaid.ca, and also Sohan, the founder of Flint, which is a personalized AI tutor. And I was just looking through your section of your book around unsupervised learning and wondering what your thoughts are around that. TeachAid has gamified learning being developed off this pedagogically curriculum-driven platform. Flint is something where you can actually set up an individual tutor on a particular topic, make it available for your students, and listen and have a conversation as well as write and discuss. And I think the opportunities to eliminate the equity problems that we have in education is there. But I wonder what your thoughts are around unsupervised learning, the opportunities and the risks.
Well, let's start with the equity issue, because I think that is one that is probably more important when I think about short-term issues. One of the problems that we have is it was great that OpenAI decided to go to the unlimited access to Chat GPT 4. Oh, that's great. It's still not the same type of access. And I think it's important for people to realize that there is still a huge difference between those who have the money to fork over to pay for access versus those that don't. And it's also, again, I'm learning that more as I was like, when we first started with Lumen, we were working on developing our curriculum. We were originally doing it for 3.5. And so we kind of had that shift that happened right in the middle of this. We're like, yay, everyone's going to have the same, access. It's going to be the same model. No, you quickly realize that no, those people who aren't paying for it have a much shorter access. And so they have less time to play with it than those of us who have paid for that access. And I think that is an equity issue that we're going to continue to see. And that is, people are going to have access to it. We still have a digital divide that exists in this world just with technology. This is just a new digital divide. And we're going to have those who have access to models and those who don't have access to models. And sure, there are open access models that are free out there. They are still not performing at the same level. Maybe one day they'll start performing at some of the frontier model levels, but right now they're just not having the same capabilities. And I think what we're seeing is that as the big dog frontier models are getting better, the other ones are just going to be catching up for the rest of our lifetime. So in that respect, I think we're still always going to have an equity issue. I think it can be used. And I think it is something that, whether you're looking at K through 12 or even in higher education, it can be used as a way of leveling out some things and giving some people a foot up that they may not have had otherwise. Just like what Sanae was talking about when it comes to just being able to use it to help with writing and thinking through, and just, using something like Edit GPT that's going to help you edit your manuscript in a way. So I do think it can help, but I also think it's creating new equity issues at the same time that aren't exactly being solved.
Yeah, and I add to that what Jason said about the equity issue. I mean, because I have it in practice. So Jason, I feel like as soon as something comes out, he goes, he purchases, he plays with it. I'm more of like in the background. I'm like, oh, ChatGPT is free. I'm gonna 3.5. I'm gonna use it and see what goes and like follow what's going on with things that are coming out, right? So I did notice actually from an experimental part of it is that they open it for like they open for instance, few hours, and then they say, oh, your time is over when you have ChatGPT 3.5, so it's like that equity issue. And you do notice obviously the difference. So it adds to the digital divide, whether we like it or not. I mean, the digital divide just even think about people from, in other places that do not even have access since the beginning. Like with COVID, for instance, they noticed that some students did not have access, and many of them will come to the parking lots in universities to get access to the web itself, so, or to the internet, so can you add to that the equity of ChatGPT, where or any AI, where people who have access to it, and I'm talking in the beautiful scenario of AI. Okay, we're not going to talk about it from the different perspective, but like have that access so they can, improve in different ways, whether it is personalized education, or even just have some, like AI keep you company. I mean, we all know, like in the Gen Z, they talk about how it is like an anxious generation, and so the loneliness and all of that is an issue. And with, for instance, GPT-4o, as it is conversational, like there are potentials for in this field, right, where they can help, where it can help, like with conversations with students, whether it's helping them through a math problem. For instance, I think like we all saw that the video from OpenAI when it just came up, and that had that experience or experiment about conversation between GPT-4o, and I don't remember one of the presenters from AI, and GPT-4 helped him solve a problem, in a mathematical problem, where through a conversation. Are you sure this is how it goes? Let's think about it this other way, etc. So that would be helpful, I think, for students, whether it's a math issue, a physics issue, or a writing issue, in that sense. But then how do you prevent or help students to keep their ideas and to keep their critical thinking, instead of like outsourcing it? And I use this word so many times already, 3 times, because that's how I feel. We are outsourcing a lot of our knowledge out there, and people who love AI say that we're going to have a collective consciousness where we all are going to be there somewhere, in the cloud of AI, and that's wonderful. But then, what about the risk that then what are you? Who are you? So that is something that I keep in the back of my mind, and I try to tell my students, at least while we are in this transition, to actually keep your idea alive and to keep your knowledge, because most knowledge is going to be there. So if you even like outsource your ideas and your critical thinking, then something is going to be missing from you, and you should preserve that. So that's why I like this, the collaboration part of it with AI, rather than looking at it as a tool or as an agent, at least at the moment, that we are all collaborating. Because in fact, when you think about it, there are silent writers in AI, right? That when you ask AI to edit something, or you ask AI to give you some information, all of these data that was uploaded from all these silent writers out there, it's there. And therefore any of us who are using it are collaborating in some ways with all these silent writers, right? So I like that idea of collaborations, and looking at it from that perspective. And I hope that my students try to see it, and our students in academia try to see it in that way. And that's why it's so important to talk about AI literacy. And I will move it to Jason so he can start with that conversation, if that's okay with you.
And I can say I'm finding new uses for it. And I think one of the most important things, and I think we're going to see all of the models doing this at some point, probably this summer, is we're getting that multimodal capabilities. I found a recent use case. I was on vacation, and my family had this old family Bible that went back in our family to the early 1700s, to about 1723, I think was the earliest entry that we had in it.
Wow.
And so we had all the birth and death records that had been written in there in cursive. Some of them were very light. And I took pictures of it all on my iPhone. And then I uploaded each picture individually into Chat GPT and just said, pull the text from this. just to see whether or not it could. And the fact that it could read cursive, from a couple hundred years ago and was actually able to accurately pull out the information. Sure, we could have done that by hand, but the amount of time that we saved just being able to get that information put together so quickly. Or recently, I also had like a couple of Excel sheets I needed to just merge together and just to tell, hey, Chat GPT, merge these two. Here's what I want you to do with it. And so there are those other things beyond just some of the writing things that I think sometimes people get bogged down to. And we're going to see these models doing more and more, and they are going to become more integral. And just the use cases is the part that is phenomenal to me, because there are so many different people that are using it in completely new and unique ways. I was working with a faculty member this week. She was having her students translating stuff from Old English into modern English, and it was doing surprisingly well at understanding Old English. And again, just another interesting use case that I'd never thought about, that you could use it in the classroom. But for, a historiographer, the fact that you could take an old manuscript and, use something as simple as your iPhone, capture the image, and be able to extract that text quickly and easily. I mean, it really is just amazing what they're doing.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. Like when you think about translation, for instance, I speak 5 languages and I understand different, like when people are speaking, whether they translated it correctly or not. But I'm so amazed with AI. Apparently now it can speak 50 languages. So and the way it translates is very accurate to a large extent, and you can sometimes I play with it, giving it words in different languages that I speak, and then I put it all in English in a very understandable, coherent understanding that I thought, So obviously the use and the help is going to be tremendous. I mean, nobody denies that.
When you look at the history of AI going back to the 1950s, natural language translation was one of the very first things we were trying to get this technology to do. It took us a while to get there, but it's definitely getting better. It's still problematic. Even if you watch the OpenAI demo when they were showing the translations, there's the one point where one of the women laughs because it clearly did not do a great job with that translation. It's still technology. That's why I think it's still important, to have a human in the driver's seat of all of this. And, I've said for years that I think, in our information age, librarians are more important today than they've ever been, because we have so much information. We need people that can help and guide us to find the best information. Now we have a thing that can generate all kinds of information for you. You still need an expert who knows this material to know whether or not what it's spitting out is right or wrong. And so I think expertise is going to become even more important. It's like, even the World Economic Forum, their 2024 risk assessment of short-term risks over the next couple of years, the first one is information or misinformation and disinformation. And this is a tool that can create a lot of misinformation and disinformation very easily. And so we are going to have to rebuild public understanding of why experts matter.
I think
Although, Jason, for just 1 second, they're saying that it's right now it has the expertise of a master's degree, of student with a master's degree at this moment with 4.0. I don't know what ChatGPT 5 will have, but yeah, it still has all these little issues that we have to be aware of.
It has the ability to do some things. It can take a great multiple choice test. But when it still comes to thinking and reasoning, it's still not there yet. But do I think it's probably going to get there?
Yes.
Unfortunately, entirely too quickly.
Yes.
Just as one other aside, so Sanae was talking about the doomer issue earlier. I'm less concerned about the technology taking over itself than I am about how humans are using the technology. I mean, in just the last couple of months, I've seen them take a flamethrower and strap it to a robot dog, let an AI fly an F-16 and do dogfights with Air Force pilots. There's now an AI over in China that has a machine gun on top. And you go, we've seen the movie. We were all told this ends badly for us. And yet it seems at times that we're just marching into that, as humans are just, as always, want to use this technology for new aspects of war. And I think that is unfortunately where we're seeing, governments spending a lot of their time on a lot of the research development. And that is a concern. that I think is way more realistic than, some AI superpower deciding that, it's going to turn us all into paper clips.
Yeah, well, unfortunately, it's like all the power that, people would have. It's that whole race to be like, to have the power of AI, right? Whether it's a company or a government right now or a nation, everybody is racing to have the power of AI. And where will it end? Well, remains to be seen, right?
Kind of like
Mm.
how, OpenAI just added the former head of the NSA to its board. Nothing to see there.
Yeah, I think if for education, it's our opportunity to decide what are the not good use cases and what are the good use cases, and empowering our faculty to be confident and competent in
And
making those decisions.
and more importantly,
Mhm.
teaching our students, because if we're not doing it, who is?
Yes.
Yeah, yeah, modeling that for them, particularly in identifying bias or just rubbish and hallucinations. I was doing a search using Perplexity the other day, and I asked it to give me the sources that it had generated this information from. And I was looking at them because I'm familiar with the area, and looking at them and thinking that doesn't sound right. Clicked on all 6 of the sources, and none of them were real, all 6. And I told
Yeah.
it, hey, you've given me sources that don't exist. The wheel spun for a little while, then it goes, yes, you're right. I am sorry.
Yes.
Here are some
Very
additional
apologetic.
sources. And the rest worked. But the original ones, you just can't close your eyes and go, it must be right,
Yeah.
and just accept it,
I
And
did
it's
a
very interesting because you think students actually know these things, but they don't. Like
No.
that's why AI literacy and teaching them how to use it, not how to use it necessarily, because the generation knows a lot about it, perhaps, and they know some AI that we are not aware of at all. But actually helping them to navigate through all the misinformation, the
Mm.
sources, for instance, like that. So in my classes, I try to incorporate it. If we're talking about sources, or I incorporate something like you just said, Craig, like that these are the sources that I asked it, and this is what it gave me. So you actually have to go there and make sure that you know what you're talking about. So it's not going to, be a problem for you, because ultimately nobody is going to say, well, ChatGPT is the culpable here. They're going to come after you and say, well,
That's
you
right.
plagiarized in some
That's
ways,
right.
so it's important to teach our students that. But not only in this sense, they are going to be working with all of these things later on. So if we just put our head in the sand, like Jason was saying earlier, then it's not fair to our students who are going to be working and competing with AI and robots eventually, so, hopefully they will be collaborating together, but, it'll be there. So we need to prepare them to, in some ways to get there.
Mm.
I mean, I think it's also important to go back to the issue of training and the training bias that exists. Most of these models were trained on large amounts of the internet, whether
Mhm.
that was ethical or unethical. That is the reality of what was done. Now, of course, there is synthetic data. But one thing, there's a wonderful website called GMTech, which allows you to run models side by side. I think you can run 8 different models, but if you want, I started playing with it because I saw an example where someone asked it to pick a random number between 0 and 100. And almost all of them across the board chose the exact same number, 42.
Mm.
And you go, why
Mhm.
42? The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy.
Right.
What is the meaning of the universe? 42.
Mhm.
That
Right.
number actually appears more on the internet. Therefore, that number actually is more common in their data sets than other numbers. And so even when it randomly picks something, it's more likely because that number just is in there more often. And that's a
Wow.
really good example of showing the bias that exists, because it was the bias of what was on the internet. And so it's
Mm.
not like it's doing it on purpose. It's just, it's putting its pieces together based on the information that it had. And I think as, obviously we interact with it more, the more that we coach it and like
Right.
things or don't like things and work with these models are going to get better. That is why it is so important for people to interact with them. And that is one of those things that a lot of people don't realize, that when they are interacting with Chat GPT, it's learning from you. And all of these models, that's when you interact with them, it is a learning process. You are helping them learn. And it's an important part of this. But it's also that part that a lot of people aren't necessarily that comfortable with the fact that they're helping to teach the next generation of models through their interactions with them. I personally don't have that fear, but I know that is an ethical concern that a lot of my colleagues have.
But I mean, like, it's to be fair, right? To be fair, we jumped on this because we like it, right? We like it. I mean, my background is in computer science. I have removed myself from it for a while, and then I went back. Jason loves it. But then, like, all these professors or other our colleagues who might not be, who might have some fear from technology and all of that, and all of a sudden, and like all the other technology prior to this, all of a sudden they need to teach, and they need to teach with AI in mind, you know? So without, I mean, that's good, but you need to, as universities, as, you know, institutions, we need to invest in training and helping academics as well to learn this. And let's face it, it's very fast, it's overwhelming, it changes hourly. Like, if you don't keep up with it for a week, then you're like overwhelmed because there are so many things that came out. And so finding a way to teach, but also finding a way to see what you focus on in your teaching is very important. I mean, issues of, I mean, I go back to AI literacy because it's important for issues of equity, accountability, etc. But it's also important for issues of bias, you know, like to talk about what are the biases that the you know, this technology generates based of the training data that Jason was talking about. Like, and we all know, I'm familiar with the training data and the biases that it incorporated, whether it's gender, ethnicity, religion, or what have you, right? And so we need to make sure that we teach our students to be aware and wary about these biases right now, and hallucinations, etc., with the technology that we are working with at this moment, you know. And but that cannot just be by itself if we don't train our academics to actually learn how to do it, and to even help them with the fear of, oh my God, a new technology again. That is a big deal, you know. So it's important, I think.
But I also think Sanae and I have started working on a textbook in AI literacy for that reason. We know that this next generation is going to be dealing with these issues. And I don't necessarily think a lot of the faculty that are out there are equipped. I listen to the conversations, and I know the conversations and the safety and security issues with AI that keep Sanae and I up at night are not the same ones that are keeping my colleagues up at night. And I think we have to be preparing that next generation of students to think about some of these larger issues of what could come down as we put more investment into AI and as AI takes over more of our life. I mean, one of the nice things that Roman Yaposki, when he was in that interview with Lex Friedman, he talks about is there's a website that has been cataloging the AI mistakes for years.
Yes.
Every model, every generation of AI, they have all had blunders. They have all had things that have gone wrong. There have always been things that happened with the model that no one could explain, no one could predict that that's what's going to happen. And those are the things that I think, you know, are the most concerning. And that's really where like the people in AI safety and security are trying to focus is how do we learn enough about the models so that that isn't going to happen? And how do you align those models, you know, with human values so that we don't run into some of these larger issues going forward? But I think the next generation of student needs to know that these are issues. They need to understand that, you know, yes, their interface may be something like Chat GPT, but there's a lot more that's going on behind that. And I think a lot of people, all that they know about AI right now is maybe Chat GPT, if that, and they're not prepared for what could be coming down the pipeline. And I always frame it as what could be coming down, because for those of us who are not actually in those companies, we don't know what they're going to throw at us next, because they're not going to tell us until they are darned ready to let us know. There's always leaks, but those leaks never seem to happen, because if those leaks had been accurate, we would have had Chat GPT 5 a year ago.
Yeah, don't worry, Jason. I think within the next 2 years, for sure, like few few months, I think, ChatGPT 5. It
I
looks
love how you
like
went
this
from
is the
2 years to 2 months, somewhere in
yeah,
that.
2 months, somewhere in there. You never know.
It's kind of like
But
AGI will be here between now and maybe 2027 to 2030 to a couple hundred years, somewhere in that time frame.
right. But hopefully it'll be the good part of it. Let's just say it that way.
Yeah. Hey, look, I want to thank you both very much for your time and appreciate your thoughts and sharing your learnings on AI and cautions as well. For both of you, how about you start, Jason? What's the best way for people to get in contact with you?
Easiest way to get a hold of me, I am Jason S. Wrench. It's Jason Stephen Wrench at every social. That's the easiest way to find me.
Awesome.
I am Elmoudden at St. John's that edu, but I also have an Instagram. Like I said, I'm an advocate for mental illness, mental health, and that's appreciating_brain_diversity.
Thank you
Thank
so much
you.
for your time. Really appreciate you both.
Thank you for having us.